Where the word of a king is, there is power. And who may say unto him, what doest thou? You may be seated. A king. I don't think we necessarily understand the concept of a king. This scripture tells us that where a king speaks, then there is power. We've never lived under a king. We live in a democracy. We put our people in power, don't we? At least that's the idea, that's how that goes. We've never lived under somebody who's sovereign, somebody that every word that comes out of their mouth must be accomplished. So we don't know. We can't understand the concept of a king because nobody can look at a king and tell them, why are you doing it that way? Because I'm the king, all right? We just don't understand this concept. But I think if we could understand this concept, we'd understand more about who God is and our relationship to Him. Recently, we watched the coronation of the King of England. How many of y'all saw that on television? Some of y'all did. Some of y'all like, I don't want to watch that mess. But it did occur, and that was a real historic event that did happen. King Charles took the throne, and I believe it really put on display what it looks like in our modern age, how we think of a king. I mean, there was all this great pomp that took place, all these big things going on as they declared him their king. But the joke of it all was, he really had no power over them at all, right? Amen. You see, the King of England, at least today, now in the past it wasn't like this, today, he's the head of state in what's called a constitutional monarchy. And that means that the ability to make and pass legislation resides within the parliament that's elected, and the king is just kind of a public relations person. The monarch of yesteryear, though, the king of the past, he had supreme authority. He or she could have looked at you, and if you looked at them the wrong way, they could have had you killed, and nobody could have said a thing about it. Why? Because they were the king. They were the queen. They were the sovereign. We don't understand that word, sovereignty. It's kind of another word for a king in a sense. But that's what God is, you understand? And when people wrote down about a king within the Bible, they were talking about somebody with that kind of power. Even more so, considering it's God, right? Amen. Some of us may hear that idea, that God is sovereign, God is in control, God is a king, and it makes us a little anxious. We don't like that idea, right? I don't like the idea that someone is in supreme authority over me. That disturbs me to think that would be the case. But it's not a bad thing if you got a good king, okay? If you got a good king, even when things go bad, even when family troubles are going on, or there's all sorts of wars and rumors of wars, or there's all sorts of different things happening in the culture, and you wonder what in the world's happening, or that thing happened to you, and you don't understand why that would happen to you, you can trust that you have a good king, right? And He's holding all things in His hand. And I tell you what, that's where peace comes from, isn't it? We should welcome that truth with all our heart because God is good and He's in control. But not all people like that fact that their Creator is in control. I mean, it's clear in our culture today. I mean, people even deny how they were born today, right? People take radical ideas of the idea of their own sovereignty, their own kinghood. And they do this to their own damnation. It would seem there are three types of people when it comes to dealing with an authority. In general, or God Himself, right? They're either the controller, right? The complacent, or the confident. The confident. What are those, Scott? Well, I want to tell you, okay? The controller. The controller must have control over the situation. I cannot lose control. They cannot give control to anyone else. Because if they did, what would happen, church? They wouldn't be in control.
Amen.
Right? They wouldn't be in control. And if it is to be done right, it must be done by them. That's the attitude of the controller. If they aren't in charge, they would just as soon burn it all down than deal with it. Right? That's the idea of someone who is this controller attitude. They will not be told no. You don't want to tell a controller no because it's like fireworks go off everywhere, right? How dare you tell me no? How could you ever say such a thing? I can't lose control. That means if you're an authority, if you tell me no, right? Maybe you've seen this in the checkout line at Walmart when they tell you can't get that price or something like that, right? They will not lose in any sense and will do anything to keep themselves from losing. These are like rebels, always believing that their way is better than the one in charge and waiting for the moment to try to wrest away the kingdom from whoever leads the kingdom. The controller. Well, the controller is one way people deal with authority. The other is the complacent. The complacent. Now, this is the one who has no conviction about anything. They just follow along with the crowd, right? If everybody's going to church, you know what we're going to do today? We're going down to church, right? But if everybody's going somewhere else, you know where we're going? We're going somewhere else, right? We're just flowing with the wind, wherever the wind blows us, because this is the complacent here. They don't follow the authority out of love or out of loyalty. They follow because it's the easiest path, the complacent. The complacent. And these are like the soldiers in Hitler's army. Some of y'all know a little history, may know some things. Later on, they were brought up for the horrors of what had happened in the concentration camps. And this was their reply about marching those Jewish people into ovens. They said, we were just doing what we were told to do. Complacent. Friends, I don't want to be complacent, do you? I don't want to be a controller either. Man, there's too much stress in that situation, okay? I don't need control over everything. I don't want to be complacent and just float with the wind. What I want, and I want you to see the need, the desire. I want you to desire, to want to be the confident. The confident. Now, the confident, they are not complacent. They are not controllers, but they will follow if it is a worthy cause in which they are confident, right? They are not controlling, but they are assertive on what is right. They stand on the truth, correct? Yeah? Y'all getting the vibe here of what I'm talking about these three different types? Amen. These folks are loyal and will stand up when they see what's wrong. And they literally just shine when they're being led by a good king. They shine. I mean, that they're beautiful. Those who are the confident. They're like the knights who fight for a good king because they know that he is right. Right? Now, which one? Here's the tough question, okay? The tough question I want you to try to work out as we go through this message today. Which one are you? Which one are you? Because I'm under the mindset that you're probably in one of these three types, okay? You're most likely in one of these three different types, or maybe just a combination of them. Sometimes we wake up and we're the controller, and other days we're the complacent. Sometimes we float around those areas. But my friend, I want us to stay strong in the confident. The confident that we have a good king that we can follow and trust to the very end, because that's where peace will reside in your heart, okay? That's where it'll be. That's where it is. So, what my desire for you today is that you'll be confident in following good King Jesus. Okay? So today I'm opening up a study on the book of Matthew. The Gospel of Matthew, without a doubt, is about one subject. One subject. The King. The King. Did y'all know that? That the Gospel of Matthew is about the King? His message is that the King of heaven and earth has come, defeated death, and left to prepare for us a kingdom. And we should all get ready for this kingdom of God that will supersede all these different kingdoms, especially the little kingdoms we've set up in our own hearts. The king is here, and the king is coming. Are you willing to accept that God is your king? Because he's your king. Whether you want to realize it or not, he is in charge. So are we the controller? Are we the complacent? Neither of those will ever be in the kingdom, the controller or the complacent. Only the confident, not in themselves, but in him, will find themselves in the kingdom of God. Only there. So I'm going to look at 5 verses this morning. 5 verses out of the book of Matthew. And we're going to look at this idea of the controller, the complacent, and the confident. The first thing I want you to see about this great king, who is the king, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, he's a worthy king. He is worthy. First of all, it says here, and this is the wise men. Everybody knows the story from Christmas. The wise men, they were coming seeking who? The king of the Jews. It says here, saying, where is he that is born, the king of the Jews? These wise men were. For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. Now this verse is from the story of the birth of Christ right here in Matthew. And you'll notice that these Gentile wise men were looking for a king. They were looking for the king of the Jews, but they were coming to worship the king of the Jews. They considered the king of the Jews to be their king, didn't they? And this was no ordinary king here. That's why most kings you showed respect to, you showed reverence to, but this baby king, they were coming to do what to? To worship. Amen. To worship. Now, I've said it many times in here before, and I'm sure some of y'all will remember it. Worship isn't just singing a song, though that takes place when we do sing a song. It's showing worth to Christ, or anything else for that matter. And the amount of worship, the word literally means to show worth. The amount of worth shown to your Creator should be the highest above all. Above all. God must come first. He is where we show all of our worship to. And that's what these wise men were doing. These wise men, they recognized that fact. They spent, look what they did here. How did they show worth? They spent their money to finance going to this place, to prepare gifts for this king, right? So they set aside money because he was worthy, right? Worship. They spent their time, a long time, coming across that desert. Some people think it took them about 2 years. The star appeared when the baby Jesus was born. It took them about 2 years because it says they come in to see the young child there inside that place, inside the house. So it took them a long time. They're willing to put their time in for God. That's worship, isn't it? I show worth by putting my time in for God. And not only that, they suffered. You think it's hard to travel across the desert back then? They didn't get on a bus. They didn't get on a plane. They didn't all jump in the car and say, well, let's go on a road trip. No, this was hard, rough dealings that they were going through to get to this king that they need to come and to worship. The one, though, they inquired here in this verse about him was a king. His name was King Herod. And he didn't worship God. You know who King Herod worshiped? He worshiped himself. That's right. King Herod sought to kill the child once he found the child was there. And he commanded soldiers to move through the streets after this event to kill all the children in Bethlehem under 2 years old. He's a sick king, wasn't he? Now, did you see it? Did you see it within the story I was telling you about? Did you see the confident, the controller, and the complacent rearing their heads in the midst of authority? The wise men, who are they? They're the confident, right? They were confident this king was worthy of worship, so they put everything they had into it. That's what it looks like, to be confident in the king. You worship him. Did you see Herod? Well, he's definitely the controller, right? Right? He worships himself. And he's going to do everything he can to keep everyone else from not worshiping this other one, right? He can't have that. The controller must be in control. And if that's the king, then he's lost control. So he goes crazy. He tries to destroy everybody. He sends his soldiers out, right? To kill all these children that are 2 years old. What a horror story, right? And there's the complacent. There's the complacent. Well, the king that's in front of me told me what to do, so I go do it. Right? Y'all seeing what I'm seeing here this morning? Amen. It opens eyes, doesn't it? It opens eyes. When we deal with authority, you are always dealing with the confident, the controller, and the complacent. Which one are you? So we have a worthy king, right? Not only do we have a worthy king, we have a king who's willing to invite everybody into his kingdom. Everybody is welcome to come. In Matthew 22, verse 2, Jesus tells many parables, and this is one of them. He said, the kingdom of heaven is likened to a certain king which made a marriage for his son. Now this parable that Jesus told tells us a great truth, that all are invited, but few will accept the invitation. The wedding banquet he's speaking about was one of the most exciting occasions in Jewish life. It could last for up to a week. And in this parable that Jesus is talking about, he compares heaven to a wedding banquet that a king had prepared for his son. Many people had been invited, but when the time for the banquet come and the table was set, those invited people, all those people who were invited to come, they refused. Not only did they refuse, when he sent his servants down there to invite them to come on in, you know what they did? They killed them. So he sent his soldiers down there to take care of them. Well, the king was enraged at this, about those who had been invited. And so he sent those to take care of these people. And then he sent invitations to anyone his servants could find. Not just those people that he had originally invited. He sent them out. And the wedding hall was filled as a result. People were coming in from all over to celebrate this marriage. But as he's there at that marriage, he noticed there's this one guy who wasn't wearing any wedding clothes. Now, the wedding clothes had been provided for. They'd been provided for. And when asked how he came to be there without the proper wedding clothes, the man had no answer. And Jesus said this man was thrown out of the feast outside into the outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then he ends with this statement, for many are invited, but few are chosen. What are they chosen for? The blessings of being at the wedding banquet, right? They just had to come on in. But here we see it again, don't we? Did you see it? Did you see it? Those who come, who were they? They were the confident. They trusted. They appreciated the invitation that was given to them, so they actually came, right? They didn't have to work for it. They just had to receive the gift and walk on in. That's what the confident did, didn't they? But then there was those that refused, right? Well, who were they? Man, this is easy, isn't it? Boy, y'all going to pass the test real good, aren't you? These were the controllers. The controllers, again, they must come on their own terms. I'm not coming down there. I'm not going to come into that door. Even if you give me an invitation, I'll not be at that place. I don't need a king. I don't need you telling me to be at a certain place at a certain time. I'll worship God wherever I want, right? I'll go out here in the nature and I'll worship God. That's the same as being at that place, right? And so, the controller. But what about the complacent? Well, there's that old guy come in without a wedding garment, right? That old guy, he hadn't made any real commitment to the king. He was just in the group walking in the door, right? Well, the group's going in, I'm going in too. He didn't come in the way that he was supposed to. He come in just willy-nilly. You got to come in the right way, don't you? Amen. Come in the right way. All are invited to come. But you got to come in the right way. And you got to come. Right? Right? All are invited to come. And it's a great feast. It's a great place of worship. It's a great place to be. But you got to come. So, this king, he's a worthy king. He invites everyone to come into his kingdom. And not only that, he's been promised as a king for a very long time. Jesus is standing here before Pilate. The people are getting ready to crucify him, right? And the governor, Pilate, he asked him, he says, art thou the king of the Jews? And Jesus said unto him, thou sayest. We find here the king of the Jews, meaning the authority in Judea, as his own people seek out a means to have him killed. But Jesus didn't shy away here from the idea of being known as the king of the Jews, did he? The Gospel of Matthew is a very Jewish book. You'll find that as we go through it, because it will reveal to us all these prophecies of this great king of the Jews that has been promised all the way from the Old Testament. And it's amazing. It's amazing that these prophecies were revealed. And yet, you know what people did? Even though they had the prophecies right here, said Micah 5:2, he's going to be born in Bethlehem. It said all these different things he was going to do, great miracles. It talks about his suffering that would actually happen there upon the cross in Isaiah 53. All these different things are shown. And you know what? People still didn't receive the king. It wasn't unclear that Jesus is the Messiah. It's not unclear today. You can go back and you can read within the Old Testament and see there's nobody else in the history of the world that could have been who the Bible said it was going to be other than Jesus. There's no doubt. But at the presentation of the king, what happened? What happened? Well, the Jewish leaders, they wanted to stay in control. So what did they do? They sought out a means to have him killed. Rome, they just wanted to get him out of their way, right? Roman governor, he heard about all these things, and he's like, I wash my hands of it, whatever. The complacent, right? But then there were some disciples who were confident. Even though at times they may have looked like they were becoming complacent as they went and hid and hid, yet there they were, confident. Are you confident? If somebody come in here today, and they were to come in this back door and they'd say, we're not worshiping Jesus in America anymore. You're not allowed to come into this building. We're going to tear this building down. Would you still find a place to worship Jesus with others? Would you suffer for him? Would you go through strife? Or would you be complacent? Or would you be controlling? Or would you be confident that the great King has actually come? Because it's not like he hasn't suffered for us, okay? It's not like he hasn't suffered for us, right? Look here. I want you to see this. He is a suffering king. Matthew 27:29 says this about him. And when they platted a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. And later on in verse 37, they set up over his head his accusation written as he hung upon that cross. This is Jesus, King, the King of the Jews. This is the mockery of the king. This is the suffering of the king, isn't it? And look at that. Even in their mockery, they're revealing that he is a king, right? When they chose to mock him as he went to the cross to pay for their sins, what did they do? They chose this idea of making a crown of thorns. And they gave him a scepter of mockery, didn't they? To make fun of him. Then they pretended to bow down as you would a king as they come before this king of the Jews. You know what? You can tell these old soldiers, they're definitely the controllers, right? That's what people do out here. I see it all the time. They mock Jesus, don't they? They don't want to follow the king, so they make mockery of him. They make all sorts of jokes about him. You know, you can make a joke. You can make a joke about Christianity all day long, but you say anything about anything else out here in this world today, and people get offended anymore, don't they? I remember a time when they used to say God's name in vain. And that'd be the worst thing you could possibly say. It'd be right up there with the big bad word, right? To say God's name in vain, but that ain't the case anymore, is it? They mock him. That's the controllers. But when he arrived in Jerusalem during the Passover, the people worshipped him. They laid palm branches under him as he rode into town before he come to this point. But now they denied him a week later when his crucifixion took place. Who does that look like? So it's complacent, isn't it? I want to ask you something. When it doesn't seem like Jesus is the king, do you still believe he's the king? Amen. This is the difference between the confident and the complacent. The confident can follow Jesus even when it doesn't make sense. When it doesn't make sense. The confident aren't swayed away from the king in the hard times. They aren't like the people who lay down the palm branches and then a week later they call out for crucifixion. Now some of them may have run scared during this time, but they did come back to him, didn't they? The confident don't have to follow the crowd with their lives. They trust their king even when it doesn't make sense. Y'all ever been through a situation that doesn't make sense? Let me rephrase that. Are you human? Right? We've been in situations that don't make sense. When Jesus When Jesus was upon that cross, there was this thief that was over the side of him. And he started out as complacent. He just went along with the crowd. He started cussing him and spitting at him and everything else, even while he was getting crucified with him. He cried out against him. Then he saw things differently. And while he was on that cross, he looked over and he said, King Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? A man being brutally tortured upon a cross, and you think he has any power whatsoever? Yet this guy saw it, didn't he? He chose to be confident rather than complacent. He came into that kingdom. He put his confidence in the King, and he wasn't disappointed. And I'm willing to say there's many of you sitting here today that you've put the confidence in the King at some point, and you weren't disappointed, were you? Because he is a king. Finally this, he is a king that can be trusted. Now listen to this. Here he is hanging upon this cross at the end of Matthew, and we're still dealing with authority here about him being the king, right? The Pharisees are down there, these religious rulers. They look at him and they say, he saved others. Himself he cannot save. If he be the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. Well, just let him come down from that cross. What would it take today for you to believe that the King of the universe had come into his kingdom? What would it take here? These Jewish religious leaders, they said, if he'd just come down off that cross. But what does that make them when they put an ultimatum before the king? The controller, doesn't it? You don't put ultimatums before the king. You don't tell God, well, you do this, and then I'll do that. You just follow him because he's God, okay? And you trust him because he is worthy of our trust. We want God. We want God. And I really believe this. We've all been through it. I'm guilty as you. We want God to work on our terms. But until we come under the understanding that he is the king, we're never going to have peace in our relationship with him. We have to trust him. I'm not foolish here this morning. There are kings not worth following. There are authorities that are not worth standing behind. Kings that shouldn't be trusted. I recognize that. Mankind's history is filled with kings who were petty, arrogant tyrants, right? Literally controllers. But King Jesus isn't like them, is he? He gave up the throne to dwell with his servants. He gave up his life to save the people of his own kingdom. He is worthy enough to humble a controller. Do you know that? He's worthy enough. He is worthy enough for the complacent to actually give him their loyalty and not just their lip service. He can make us all confident followers in the kingdom if we will just be honest with ourselves in how we are following him here. How are we following him? There's no shame. No shame in bowing before a king who is worthy. Right? I hope you're enjoying the sermons here and have subscribed to my channel on YouTube. But I would love even more to meet with you in person at the church where I'm blessed to pastor at in White Pine, Tennessee, Omega Baptist Church.